Cynicism is just another form of cowardice. For our sergeant are not interested in a midlife crisis. We were to do our freaking work.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 24 of the Spotlight Podcast, Success Stories for Veterans, where it is our job to break down and analyze titans in both the military and civilian communities to discover their tactics, their mindset, and their systems so that you can take those and apply them to your life and ultimately to your transition. Those titans range from New York Times bestselling authors to former heads of state to other divergent thinkers who are out there dominating their field by challenging conventional wisdom. And today we are interviewing Brad Scardino. Now, Brad got his start as a crew chief of the mighty CH-53. And after getting out, Brad pursued a number of different paths and ultimately decided to pursue a career in engineering. Now, Brad works with Flux to help other veterans do the exact same thing. So if you have ever wanted to pursue a career outside your comfort zone, then this is the episode for you. So how does Brad do it? Listen and find out. So Brad, for people who are not familiar with you, tell me who you are and what you do.
Well, I am a Marine Corps vet, and currently I am a program manager at Flux Resources, and my job is to effectively help veterans find their next job and their next career move. So whether that's helping them out with a job that we have, or if it's just giving them a piece of advice, something I can, some guidance that I can provide and help them make that next move.
Yeah. So you're obviously doing that now, but talk to me a little bit about, the first period outside of the Marine Corps. Talk to me a little bit about your transition and what that looked like for you for the first couple of years.
Oh man, a lot happened in the first couple of years. I'm a planner. So when I got out, I had a plan, and it was that my brother and I were going to run our my dad and stepmom's business. It was a dog kennel, and so we did that for a little while. Did that for about 6 months, and then just kind of doing business with family, and kind of had a little bit of drama that ended up not working out. So I did that by myself for a little bit, and then after that went to up here in Oregon, where I currently am, and that's where my kid's mom, my then girlfriend, is from. So came up here, and I started going to school, and I did use the GI Bill, and basically just focused on school for the next pretty significant period of my life, actually about 6 years, doing a lot of stuff during that time as well. But the main focus was going to school for mechanical engineering. And during that period, it was 6 years straight. I didn't even take a semester off to go for mechanical engineering, and then added a second degree as well. So, but for those first couple of years, it was definitely, I'd use the word turbulent, trying to get, just get my life on track, and making a plan, and then things not working out, and then readjusting, reorienting myself, and kind of constantly doing that loop of what's going to happen next, and how do I plan for and execute that.
Yeah. And so you said it's turbulent. Tell me about the turbulence. What was turbulent at that point?
Well, you get out and everyone's like, hey, do this, do that. This is what you need to do. Most of the time based on their own personal experience. It could be something that worked for them or something that didn't work for them. Yeah. And that's kind of, they have this one data point where they're like, this is the thing that you need to do. And that's their truth. And I'm sure that that's was the case for their life, but it's not necessarily what's right for you. And so you kind of when it's people you trust, you don't even necessarily question it. You're like, oh, this person is someone who is like, for me, my brother, he told me he's a Marine Corps vet as well. And he was like, hey, you got to go do this, go to the VA, do all these things. And it wasn't that they were explicitly wrong. It was just that it wasn't necessarily what was right for me. And I would say that lent to a lot of the turbulence was kind of just thinking about or executing a plan based off of someone else's advice and someone else's experiences, and it wasn't the right thing to do. Hindsight's 20/20, right? So that was the kind of that piece of it. And then in the personal piece of it with like the business piece of it, I should say, with running that kennel, the plan was that my brother and I would buy it. And then it just didn't end up working out that way. There was a lot of issues. We had issues with employees. We had issues kind of with how the plan, what we thought it was going to look like, and what my dad and stepmom thought it was going to look like. We weren't on the same page. And so we just we talked about it once or twice and was like, okay, cool. And we went forth. But we never really followed up on it until it was getting close to the time to make that happen.
Yeah.
And it was not what we envisioned, any of us. So just it ended up not working out because we were never on the same page.
Yeah. So how did that actually manifest though? I mean, what were the impacts to your day-to-day life when you're going through that and you're not on the same page with other people, whether it's the kennel or otherwise? What was going on?
Day to day, I would say the biggest thing was it was always on my mind every day. I thought about with the VA stuff. I always had appointments that I was having to set and these different things that kept coming up that I needed to really focus on. And so it was like a constant distraction. And then with the kennel, there was this, at first, just trying to understand how is this business run. We had over 100 dog runs. And so there was a lot of different, or weekends were usually booked, holidays were always booked. And so just getting my head wrapped around the day-to-day minutia of it and learning, okay, this is the way they did things. And I had to kind of come up with new processes. Like, this doesn't make sense. Why are you doing it this way? And trying to, the turbulence came with the pushback of like, hey, we need to make these changes because they don't make the way we're doing it now doesn't make sense. And it was, that's how we've always done it and things have gone fine. It's like, well, that's great. But then doing something for the sake of having always done it does not mean it's a good way to do it.
Right. And so when you found yourself in that situation, I mean, you obviously didn't stay in it forever because you're doing something different now. What did it look like? You said you're a planner. What did the planning phase look like as you're moving past that? Or what was the crux of the decision?
To move past it, you mean?
Yeah.
I would say the once we really tried to make it happen where it's like, okay, I'm going to take over now. And like,
right.
How do we make this happen? And once I realized that they were not on the same page as us and they didn't want to sell it, at least not in the way that we had envisioned, it was, okay, well, this isn't what I signed on for. I didn't sign on to be a dog kennel manager. I wanted to be a business owner. Right. That wasn't my plan. And so, okay, that's fine. You don't want to do that. Next, what do I want to do? And so it was, okay, well, I usually take a couple months when I'm making big decisions like that and kind of just to absorb, just mark my time and then really just evaluate, okay, what are my options? And so I thought about, okay, I could go get a different job. I could go to trade school. I could go to school. It doesn't have to be here. That was definitely wanted to be around that area. My ex-wife, her family's up here in Oregon, so ended up that being a good place to kind of land and get some distance from that, and say, okay, well, if I want to not have this, like my family and their the drama that related to that kennel, I needed to step away from it. And
right.
So how do I do that? So physically remove yourself is one way to do that. Which didn't necessarily mean leaving the whole state, but where do we have a support structure? It was here in Portland. So then that kind of led us to the place. Okay, well, now what am I going to do? Not just where am I going to do it? Well, kind of going to thinking back, I was thinking, what did I always want to be when I was a kid? Like, that's when you're the most honest with yourself is that's when your dreams come out. And so I always wanted to be an inventor. I thought that'd be really cool to invent something. go through that whole process. And so who does inventing? Typically it's engineers.
Yeah.
And so what I'm mechanically inclined. And so chose mechanical engineering, talked with a few engineers, kind of did my due diligence, so to speak. And, thought, okay, well, this is it. And then I focused on that goal. And then then the next was how. Okay, how do I do this? Well, GI Bill. Moving to another state. I was a little concerned that there was going to be some issues with the state funding, because if you're not a resident, there can be some issues. But luckily, that didn't become an issue with me. I was able to just go into school, and GI Bill covered it, until the GI Bill ran out.
Right.
And so it's kind of essentially what the planning phase looked like.
Gotcha. So when you were talking to the engineers before you're making the decision, or you're like, okay, I'm being honest with myself, I want to be an engineer because I want to invent stuff. I want to make the next Slinky, but I want to make it better or whatever. when you're going out there and you're talking to these engineers and trying to get the lay of land, what kind of questions are you asking them?
It runs the gamut. So everything from how did you get to where you are now, and what do you do? I think one of the most important things is what do you do on the day to day? Like, is that something that I actually want to do? With a lot of jobs, a lot of careers, there's not necessarily a typical day to day, but you get an idea of like, what are the tools you work with every day? Like, how do you take something from concept to, okay, now I have this thing in my hand. I've made this thing, like I've invented it. You don't necessarily need a patent to be an inventor. And so how do you take these things from a customer need, for instance, to here, I have this product that I'm delivering. And that would be one of the most important questions I asked, is like, just how do you do that? And from that, I realized, okay, there's definitely no typical day, which is what I really loved. I don't like doing the same thing day after day. That's hard for me. Even week to week can be difficult. And so I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And different engineers do different things. So it's really about where you land. But I knew that was an option. And if I wanted to make that happen, I could.
Right.
And then I thought about the path. And, I was like, oh, do you really need school to do this? And they're all like, I mean, technically you don't, but I've never met an engineer who didn't have one, who didn't have a degree. So, that they're kind of phasing that out of most companies only hire people who are degreed at this point. Yeah. So I was like, okay, well then realistically, to make sure I have the best odds and really to prepare myself, you can't YouTube.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's probably not a process you want to learn through trial and error. Like,
right.
Oh, that bridge didn't work.
Right. And so kind of talking about the path, like, how do you do that? And they're like, oh, calculus 4 and differential equations and linear algebra. And you're just like, at first I was like, oh, that seems kind of daunting. And then I took some tests to kind of see where would I even place? Like, am I going to have to start back at math 0? And, basically anything above addition and subtraction. And I had to start pretty low. I had to go through every basic, I think there were like 2 math classes I was able to skip, which is just your arithmetic and then your kind of the step after that. So I started with like pre-algebra and
back to the beginning.
Yeah, basically it's like I had gone all the way up to pre-calculus in high school. And so I knew I really liked math, but it was like, man, that's a lot of classes to have to take. And then, so, okay, I have to do a lot of that, a lot of engineering things, which are essentially the same. It's just a different kind of math problem.
Right.
And so that was essentially the path. And I was like, okay, well, I can do that. I enjoy learning. I love learning. That was the biggest draw to me, was that I get to constantly learn new things. And where do I apply those things now?
Yeah.
And so that was the answer to how do you get there?
Right. And so you're learning that from the engineers, and now you're doing what you're doing. Are there any questions that you wish you would have asked during that time frame that maybe would have given you better insight?
Oh, definitely. How long have you been doing this? And can you see yourself doing this in, say, 5, 10, 20 years? Do you want to be doing the same thing? And if not, why not? Or if so, why? what is it about this job that is so fulfilling to you? I wish I would have gotten more to the motivations. I think that would have been helpful in really finding out more about, is this the right path for me?
Right. And is that why you would ask those questions, is just to purely understand that, or is there more to it?
I would say mostly mostly for that reason.
Okay.
I think it's a good question in general, just kind of like, okay, now you're doing this, almost like a credibility, like, is this the right person to be talking to? Because if it's someone who hates what they do, and I didn't know that, they're telling me about all this, like, that probably wasn't the right person to talk to. And I have no idea if that was, like, hindsight, I don't know if that was the right advice to take, because it was from someone who I didn't really know. Kind of the same problem that I had with the transition advice. Very similar. Like, I didn't know what constituted good advice.
Right. And how would you look out for good versus bad advice when you're in with that? So obviously you're asking about their key motivations and getting that credibility component. What else would you do to make sure that you're not, talking to the people that I can't stand, which are bullshitters, right? How do you avoid that?
I think one of the biggest things is it just comes with time and experience, right? So you have to, I think the best way to do it is to not take any one person's advice too much to heart. I think a lot of times bad advice is good advice that's just not applicable. So it's not necessarily that the advice is bad, it's just that it's not right for you. And so I think the biggest thing, what I try to do now, is I seek as much advice as I can, and then I kind of average it, so to speak. I will say, okay, well, this person, did that apply? What are the things that could be other factors that were relevant to this piece of advice? Had they been, just doing it right out of school and they were super stoked because it was their first job? They were still, wide-eyed and bushy-tailed? Or is this the old crusty guy who's doing it 20 years, 30 years later, and he hates it and wishes he had done a different career path? But right now, that's all he knows how to do. So that's what he does.
Yeah. And so in addition to talking to the engineers and kind of piecing through all of that, what else were you doing to get the lay of the land as you were making that shift into engineering and away from the kennel scenario?
Researching the different schools, what are the programs? What are my, if I want to do, I was kind of at the beginning, it was just, okay, engineering, inventing. What does that actually look like? Do I need to, what are the different kinds? Okay, I knew there was different kinds of engineers, but I didn't really know anything about the different kinds. I looked into like electrical, and I'm like, oh, that is way too much for me. I looked at civil, and I was like, that's not really my interest. I don't really want to make roads and bridges or wastewater treatment plants. I want to make physical products that you can hold in your hand. And so then I looked at mechanical, and I really focused on that because it was, I remember really enjoying working on the helicopter, working on cars, doing woodworking. I really like working with my hands and having this physical thing at the end that I've made. And I feel like mechanical is the most applicable of all the different engineering fields to that kind of outcome. And so that's probably the other thing I would say I did was kind of personal research on what do I want in that field, and then the individuals that I spoke with to see, is this something that kind of probe them, find out information from them, is this right for me? Yeah. Because I do that with other fields too. You don't necessarily just pick one path and go down to one path. Kind of take a look at a few different paths and you say, okay, well, which ones kind of, you narrow them down. Okay, this one doesn't work because of that. And then just focus on engineering. And then I brought it up again. Okay, electrical, mechanical, civil, all these others. And the other reason I chose medical is because at the time it was the closest thing to biomedical engineering, which is where I really wanted to go, was more focusing on, I wanted to make the Iron Man suit, and I was like, how do we make this thing real?
Yeah.
And it was mechanical, just again, it was the natural fit for that piece.
Right. And how do you feel, or how do you feel out when you've done enough research versus, like now it's time to make a decision, more information isn't going to be helpful? How do you determine that point for yourself?
No, at the time, I didn't have any kind of bar that I would necessarily set. Sometimes that bar would be just like, hey, we're out of time, like a decision's got to be made.
Deadlines are fun,
Right? Yeah. If it wasn't for the last minute, nothing would ever get done, right?
Yeah.
So that's what it ended up being on that one. It was just like, you got to make a decision. Luckily, I was able to not have to focus too much on the field at the time.
Gotcha.
I knew engineering, but the field, like all the basics, your first at least year of engineering school is pretty much the same for everyone, no matter what you're doing.
Right.
And then, so I was able to bide my time a little bit there. But now I would say I try to define that criteria before I even approach the research. So, in this scenario, it would have been, it's really kind of feelings based. What do you want to do? Like, there's no way to quantify that. You have to feel it in your gut. You have to know, at least have an intuition, something that is intrinsic, and it's not going to be a data point that's like, okay, I've reached this threshold. Now I know this one.
That's a very good point, that it is more just, we want to quantify it. We get all these KPIs like, well, if I get like this type of response, then that's the one, and that's the ticket. And I feel a lot of people get a little bit disillusioned when that doesn't surface. So let's fast forward a little bit and talk to me about, because you went to school for mechanical engineering, and now you're doing this program management position that was tailored for you. Talk to me about that, the marrying of those concepts together, your engineering background and what you're doing now.
Oh, that story was, it was kind of a 6 month or so decision to move out of out of engineering and into recruiting. Mm-hmm. One day I was looking at my boss, and he was doing this like really cool technical thing with this CNC machine that we had purchased to kind of help us do rapid prototyping. And he was talking about all these different aspects of it, G code and all these different things that at the time I had no idea about. And he was able, and he didn't either, like the previous day, but then he just basically learned it overnight. I'm like, how can you do this? And he was so focused on that technical aspect. And I thought to myself, I think it's great that he wants to do that. But I was like, I don't want to be super technical. I like having a high level knowledge on a lot of different things. But I don't want to do a deep dive on the technical aspects. I don't want to be in 5, 10, 15 years. I don't want to be the best possible engineer. And it was just something I never would have realized if I hadn't done it. Yeah. And I have zero regrets for having done it. It was absolutely essential to the path that got me to where I am today. But at that point I was like, okay, I knew it. And so there's that, intrinsic feeling again. It was like, okay, something just happened and it snapped, and I realized, okay, so now what do I do? Kind of go again back to that same evaluation process. And every time I make a move, I do something. I want to make sure I'm pushing myself. I want to learn something, a new skill, a new set of information, whatever it is. And I had recently gone through a divorce at that point, and I wouldn't say a stereotypical engineer in the pocket protector sense. Yeah. But personality wise, definitely. And so engineers are definitely not known for their communication, especially communication. And
if you'll see section 5.3 of the manual.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was like, well, I really want to be better at communicating. I suck at it. I just, people never seem to take or understand the point that I'm trying to make. Mm-hmm. And one person, maybe it's them, but when it's almost everyone, it's me. So it's like, I needed to make a change. And so I knew that I wanted to do something where I was going to be having a lot of interpersonal communication. And so I thought, but I wanted to stay close to engineering because I still love engineering. And so I thought, like, what about engineering sales? And so I was kind of thinking about this for a couple months. I went on a trip to this optical engineering conference down in San Francisco. And on the plane, I was talking to the person next to me, just, hey, what do you do kind of stuff, normal conversation. And when I was explaining what I did to that person, another guy across the aisle overheard me. And then he struck up a conversation with me, asking me kind of some more detail. And he's actually a recruiter. And then he was trying to recruit me. And so I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. And so he put me in contact with the right person. And he was that person was like, asked me what I want to do and a little bit more in depth. And she was like, well, what do you think about, doing engineering recruiting? And I was like, I never really thought of that. Kind of like, tell me more. Like, what does that look like? And she told me about it. And I was like, okay, that sounds definitely like something I'd be interested in. And then I give my mom a call because my mom was an engineering recruiter for 10, 12 years, specifically IT. And I asked her about it. And she's like, oh, you'd be great at it, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you say that about literally anything I could do.
You're an unreliable source, Mom.
Yeah.
Some fact checks.
Yeah. So I call up the same thing. Call up some other recruiters, some that I know, some that I don't, and just kind of ask them, talk to them about what that's like, and go through that same process once more. And like, okay, yeah, that actually there's an opportunity. It seems like one I could take, and I had kind of built myself up a runway because I knew that mostly with recruiting, it's you're not necessarily making as much as in engineering, so I had to kind of prepare myself for that. And then one day I just walked in, talked to my boss, and was like, hey, it's been great, but I'm going somewhere else. And I'm like, oh, where are you going? And I'm like, doing recruiting. They were like, wait, what? Like, what are you talking about? And just kind of explained to him like why I wanted to do that. And great relationship. Still go have drinks with him on occasion. And so it was definitely a good exit. But that's more or less what that transition looked like, into kind of completely changing career paths.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point that you brought up about like kind of like the clean, nice exit. Talk to me about the importance of that and what that's meant in terms of moving forward.
It's funny because it was definitely a good clean exit, but there was a bit of a catch there. So with him personally, definitely that's the case. With the company, they're like, oh, recruiting. They're like, don't try and recruit all our engineers, basically. And like they're circled and highlighted the clause that I signed at the beginning, and made me review it during my exit interview. Then, which was pretty fun.
I love those conversations.
Right. Yeah.
I've seen a lot of them.
And I'm like, oh, I wouldn't do that. I was like, I learned a great deal here. I really appreciate this, opportunity I've had. And it's been, I feel like, fruitful for both of us. And then a few months later, I started an engineering meetup. And I reached out to all the engineers that I knew there. And they sent me a cease and desist.
Oh my God.
Because they thought I was trying to recruit them.
My goodness.
It's like, no, I'm just trying to hang out. Like,
of course.
So it was a clean break at first, but it kind of came back, and they didn't appreciate that I was reaching out to the engineers after that.
No, that is a good distinction. I'm glad that we covered that territory, because weird stuff like that does happen, and
I never would have thought.
How do you respond, or what was your initial response to that situation?
So initially, I was like, "What the hell? Like, just be an adult. Give me send me an email. Like, don't there." And that. So, anyways, that was kind of my initial thought, and I sat on it for a minute. I ended up calling the CEO, left him a voicemail. He didn't take my calls, but it was something that I think that. It was something that really took me off guard. Mm-hmm. But my then boss was like, he's like, you're not a real recruiter till you get one of these. He was like, congrats.
There you go. You cut your teeth in the next industry.
Yeah.
Exactly. So now you're doing this program management position, which you are thrilled about, and which is how we got back in touch. So walk me through the day in the life of the program manager, since that's what you look for when you're talking to people. What does that day-to-day look like for you, or week to week, month to month?
So it is in the past couple of months, it's a very new role. So it's something that I'm helping to kind of define what that's going to look like. The biggest thing is reaching out to organizations who are focused on helping veterans and veterans with employment specifically. So a lot of like VA placement services, the state agencies that do similar things, or really any organization. I've kind of got my my list of different organizations that I want to help or want to partner with, I should say. And one of the biggest things would be, if I if I know I'm successful when I am in all of the TAPS and TAMPS programs, and I have those contacts, and I'm able to help veterans who are right out of that transition, and just kind of give them advice and be a resource. Like, hey, if you're looking for something, here's here's some possible options, or just, hey, it's going to be difficult. Like, I want to be able to provide advice and help guidance from how do you get from this very structured life to now you're creating your own structure. What is that? How do you do that? And really help them to understand the different options that they have from a career, or not even career necessarily, just next step standpoint.
Yeah.
Because it might be, you want to go just, work a mid-level, low-level job because you don't want any responsibility for a little bit, because you used to have responsibility of everyone's life, and you just want to just like hang out for a minute.
Yeah. Cool the jets and skate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what can vets do, or what have you seen for veterans that are having smoother transitions versus the ones that are maybe a little bit more turbulent, like you and I?
I think that it's kind of a difficult question to answer. I would say one of the biggest aspects that I see for a lot of people is rigidity. If you are super rigid in your thinking and you want to, like, for me, I had this plan and it was like, this is the plan. And I wasn't really open to even making exceptions to that plan. I was okay with the how it happens, but there was no exception to this is what the end goal is going to be.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that was something that made my life a little bit harder than it needed to be. And I would say just kind of getting past that, you're a civilian again, and there is no rank structure. So like, things that you personally take offense to, that like, people aren't trying to be offensive. It's not like they don't owe you any particular form of respect. And you're out of that kind of very structured, I'm above you, this person's above me kind of standpoint.
Yeah.
And so when you have conversations with someone who might be younger than you, and they're talking back to you, like, they have every right to. They're civilian. They don't have to do that. They don't have to be nice to you. And just kind of not like, for me, I know I internalized that, like, this little punk talking to me like this. That's not reality, right? And it took me a long time to realize that.
So in rigidity, talk to me about from the career standpoint. So, obviously you don't want to be rigid. You kind of want to adopt that Semper Gumby mindset. Always be flexible, right? Absolutely. What can you do, or are there common steps that you can take to set yourself up for success, at least on the career side of the house? Like some common things that you can do to help me, if I'm coming to you, what I can do to put arrows in your quiver.
Yeah. So I would say the one of the best things that you can do, and it doesn't matter, this is true for any job, but especially before you're getting out, really think about all of the accomplishments you've done. You should always be recording what you've done. You should be writing your resume while you're working. So kind of consider, most people don't stay at a job for 20, 30 years, or definitely not their whole career anymore. Like, people move around. And even if you were to stay at the same place, you want to be able to have that information for your promotion and say, hey, look, boss, this is what I've done. And so I would say the one of the biggest things that would be most helpful is to really record all of the things that you've done and your accomplishments. And don't just say, hey, I helped this program succeed. Quantify it. to the best of your ability, to however is possible. I increased the outreach to veterans by 300%, or whatever that thing looks like. Define it somehow. Usually there's KPIs associated. That would be the number one place to look. With the military stuff, it's going to depend on your MOS. But how were you successful in that MOS? What did you do to help out the organization as a whole?
Yeah.
So that would be probably the number one thing to do.
Are there any particular areas that you think that people are like types of KPIs that you can use? Like whether it's like I reduce the time, I increase the output. What are the big hitters when you're working with people?
Definitely, the number one is going to be cost savings, almost always. So were you able to save money? Military, it doesn't usually work that way. That's not typically how a budget in the military works. But that would be the number one. After that, it's really just about being able to put numbers behind it, not necessarily any particular thing. Because again, it's going to highly depend on the specific career.
Gotcha.
So, what an engineer would quantify is definitely going to be different than what a business analyst is going to quantify.
So that's something then, if I'm doing my market research, like you suggested earlier, are those the types of things that I should be asking about?
I hadn't thought about it, but I would say yes, actually. How are you held to? What standards are you held to? What does your promotion depend on? That would be a good one. Is what are your KPIs? I would say yes.
All right, let's switch gears for a sec. All right, because we danced around a subject that is hot right now. It's a hot topic, and I would like to get a recruiter's take on it, because I think that for me personally, I see the landscape shifting. Other people are, but it's all speculative. Talk to me about college degrees. Now, obviously, in the world of engineering, it seems like pretty much mandatory. Do you have any sense of how imperative it is to have a college degree in other fields like general business and in those types of situations?
So a few comments on that. Okay. I would say the biggest thing about college that I think is a misconception, and something I actually was resistant to college for the longest time. My oldest sister pushed me towards it pretty heavily, and I was just like, no, you don't need to have a college degree to be successful. I named a few people who were, and all the while this tiny fraction of a percent of successful people, the vast majority have degrees, and I would say that's the thing I didn't understand about a college degree, is that it communicates, one, that you're able to stick with something long term. And so it could be underwater basket weaving, it doesn't matter. But you have a 4-year degree, it shows that you are able to commit and follow through. So it's not necessarily that you have a specific degree. In a lot of the jobs that I've worked for or worked on, it's that you have a degree of some sort. And so, a lot of times they'll say, or related field, which is typically code word for, just as long as they have a degree. The other thing that I didn't realize is a degree teaches you how to think like a fill in the blank. So all those math problems, I haven't done almost any math problems as an engineer, like in the true sense of kind of what I did. It was teaching my brain how to solve a problem. And it was exercising those neurons, and it was something that I didn't appreciate until after the fact. And so I think that there's a lot of value in that. But I don't think, going back to your question, I don't think that you necessarily need to have a degree if it's not in a field that you want. So you really need to research, what are the people who are successful in that field? What do they have? Like if you want to be an electrician or a plumber, and that's the thing that you want to do, that's, you love working with your hands and being a tradesman, then you need to go to a trade school, not a college degree. But I would say that for the vast majority of careers out there, there's going to be some form of schooling you need to do. So whether it's a college degree, like a traditional bachelor's 4-year degree, maybe that's not necessary, but you're probably going to have to go to school. But you're really going to have to research what does that school look like. you think about a lot of careers, you have to have postgraduate degrees, to be a lawyer, to be a usually engineering managers. A lot of times have to have either an MBA or an engineering master's. A doctor, right? You're gonna have to have something after your 4-year pre-med degree. There's gonna have to be something. So the more niche your particular niche isn't the right word. I guess going back to, you really got to focus on what is that career and ask the successful people now. And that brings up another good question that would be good to ask is, what are the trends in your field that you're seeing? Like, are you seeing that people need to, that they're going to, what are the things that you had to do to be successful? What are the things that the guys who are your interns now are going to have to do to be successful? Are they going to have to fight the same battles or different battles?
Yeah.
What's universal, what's not?
Yeah, that's a really good distinction. Not only what are the trends now, but the starting with the end in mind. And I think that's what I don't hear in a lot of analysis from people that I'm listening to talking about colleges. Going for the sake of going. I don't know if that's
just bad advice.
I don't know.
Plain and simple.
Yeah.
I would say, if it's something that you do because it's, you love to learn, like, man, if I had a magic wand, if I had $1 billion, I would go to school all day. I would go to every different university and I would learn, things from that they focused on and specialized in. I love learning.
Yeah.
But that's not going to get me anything other than personal joy.
Right.
Like, it's not going to help me make money. So that's, I think a big distinction, like you just said, don't ask, just Joe Blow off the street. You have to ask someone who's going to have knowledge in that domain.
Yeah. And so let's switch gears again, because I want to get into just kind of the mindset that you operate with on a day-to-day basis. Now, obviously, you've gone through a lot of growth through this period, and that's consistent among the veterans that I look for and that I talk to. What resources or what things were out there that were really changed your mindset and got you into your new mode?
Well, I would say I remember very vividly, it was How to Win Friends and Influence People. That's a great probably the number one thing for me. I listened to that book on basically an 8-hour drive, finished the whole thing in one setting. And so it was like this, just usually with a book, you read a chapter at a time or listen to it an hour at a time. But I was just able to take this whole book in, and it really got me thinking, like, oh, wow, that was kind of where that communication piece, I realized how much I was lacking that. And so that was probably the catalyst. And then after that, I would say that does a really good job of telling you what to do, but it doesn't really tell you how to do it. So again, as an engineer, horrible with interpersonal communication, I was like, okay, well, now how do I even just have like a basic conversation that's, not focused on like getting a piece of information, or, just if you just want to shoot the shit, like I couldn't do that. That was not something I was really able to do very well. And so I found this book, How to Talk to Anyone, 92 Little Tricks for Big Success in Business, by a lady named Leo Lowndes. And that book definitely changed my life. It was like, okay, that gave me the nuts and bolts of here's how you approach different situations. One of the things that I really loved about it, she tells essentially a story with each little trick. It's 92 chapters. Like, she breaks each one out individually. And, one of my favorites was like, look for a what's it when you're out and you're trying to strike up a conversation. And so, what's that on your lapel? What's that, rings symbolize? You try and find this thing to kind of break the ice and have the conversation. And she talks about all these different things that you can do. And so I was like, okay, cool. That's helpful. And so that really started this process of me just consuming everything I could on communication and figuring out how to be better at it.
Yeah. And have there been any situations where you've applied that and you're like, wow, that totally worked?
Oh yeah, absolutely. When I've gone to a lot of networking events, especially as doing recruiting, and you have this group of people. It's usually a closed group, and that's another things that she talks about is you don't just walk right in and say, and budge your way in. You wait till there's at least a break in the conversation, and then you kind of you walk in. Hey, mind if I join your conversation? You just little things like that, and everything was just super simple. And I was just shocked at how simple it was and how I didn't see that I was making it more complicated than it needed to be. And I was getting in my own way.
Yeah. Do you have like a specific example of where it went really well?
Oh yeah. I at one of those networking events, very, very similar thing. First, kind of got into the conversation with that, mind if I join your conversation? And then naturally conversations, they have ebbs and flows and it starts to get dull. A couple of people walk off, but there was this one person I really wanted to talk to, and trying to get personal with them. And what's that? I want to say it was a bracelet, if I remember correctly. What's that bracelet? It had like some cool charms on it.
Yeah.
And so they just started talking about it, and I was wanting to talk to them as a candidate, but I got them talking to me, and that was the first step. Just just having the conversation. And this person loved that their charm bracelet, and they were able to, or I was able to then kind of transition that conversation, steer it a little bit away from that, and kind of more to where I wanted to. But also, this person now, they got to talk about something they really wanted to talk about, and I could tell how much that bracelet meant to them by the enthusiasm they had in their voice.
Yeah, and
so it was like, wow, this stuff works.
And what was the net result? Did they end up becoming a candidate with you?
They did. Yeah. I submitted into a job. I think it was like 2 days later. And it was because, I was able to do that. And it's, then you just kind of, you do that constantly. It's a constant thing. And so now I used to hate having conversations with people. And now I thoroughly enjoy it. It's kind of funny how you make this, transition and thinking like an engineer and this mindset, and then you have to do this growth when you're doing a career transition. Now I'm a recruiter. My job is to talk to people all day long, is what I was doing, and so I really had to push myself to do that, and it was hard at first, and then I started to enjoy it.
Yeah,
it was kind of weird how like all of a sudden it was something that was a really truly enjoyable part of my day.
Yeah, well, and you can almost take like an engineer process to it. I've got my what's its, I've got my how's its, I've got I've got all these little tricks in my bag, and I can pull them out exactly whenever I need them. If there's a lull in the conversation, there's no anxiety. And then what I've heard of
if then tree.
Yeah, exactly. A/B analysis. All right, cool. I'm gonna go lean on this conversation. This is gonna. Yeah, it makes it so much easier. And you're, oh wow, that is actually way easier. And the person who asks the questions controls the conversation. You actually talk less.
Exactly. And that was the other thing. It's like, okay, well, I don't really like talking about myself too much. Mm-hmm. So if I'm asking questions, I'm getting someone else to talk to me. That it accomplishes two things. One, I get to learn more about this person, and whether are they a right candidate, but also I'm not talking about me. So it's a win-win as far as I'm concerned.
Oh yeah. And you get all this sweet intel. And they know as much as you want them to know, which I think is fascinating. So let's talk. Yeah. I know you're a busy man, Brad, and I know you've got a lot going on, but give me one thing that you haven't already discussed that you wish you had known then when you got out that you know now. If you had internalized this, what would have been a game changer for you?
I would say really. This kind of goes into a potential another resource, another book that I had called Outwitting the Devil, and by Napoleon Hill. One of the, I would say probably that's the third most instrumental resource I've ever come across. And this concept of a definite major purpose, and okay, what do I want to do with my life? And then you talk about it every day, you think about it every day, having this guiding principle. And if it's one thing to have a plan of how you're going to get there, of how you're going to accomplish a specific goal, but what's the overarching concept that drives you? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you want to be a humanitarian? What's the thing that you want to do? And making sure you think about it every day. What's on the front of your mind is going to be what drives you. And so making sure that you not only define it, but then think about it every day. Don't put it back, somewhere that you're going to check on later. Think about it consistently, because that's how you're going to make sure you don't lose course, and you don't have to do this course correction as much, because it's always there. It's guiding every decision you make.
Yeah. And how do you implement that now? Where do you put yours?
So I just print it off. Have a list of all of the different things. Some things are short-term goals, and some of them are just kind of my overarching kind of life principles. And I read them every day. I think about them, and I go through my routine. I wake up, go to the bathroom, brush my teeth, and then I come and I do that. I read that, and I think about, what do I want at the end of my life? Again, thinking about beginning with the end in mind.
Yeah.
What do I want to have accomplished when I'm on my deathbed? What do I want to look back and say, hey, I'm glad I was able to do that. That was extremely important to me.
Yeah. What's funny is I say that very same thing, and people are like, that's so morbid. I'm like, that's reality, Holmes. that's where we are. You are gonna die. And the people are like, you're really bringing the mood down. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be news. Yeah, that shouldn't be news.
Circle of life, buddy.
Yeah. All right, Brad. Thank you so much for coming today, brother. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Hey everyone, thanks again for listening to another episode of the Spotlight Podcast. And I just wanted to take a second to ask you who you think should be interviewed on the show. Who do you think is out there that's just absolutely crushing it that the veteran population needs to hear from? That's what we want to hear from you. Send us your suggestions to spotlight@thezenveteran.com. That's SPOTLIGHT @thezenveteran.com. Thanks again for listening.